What is going today, squad? My name is Erica L. Day, and welcome back to the Phoenix Mercury podcast. I am joined by MVP QB1 on and off the field, Stephen Pridgeon Garner. Stephen, I know we're not gathered here to talk all about the Mercury today, and it's kind of a off time for us, but nonetheless, I think I'm so excited to be here. How are you doing today?
Blessed as always. It's always fun to talk basketball. Never take these opportunities for granted. And we got some high level hoop going on in addition to some news and some things to kind of project on going forward. So excited to hop into it. How you feeling today?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. The Mercury did take an L last week, couple of L's, sweep L, whatever. Nonetheless, I had one of the best weekends for sports in a very long time. So I'm rejuvenated, revitalized. Welcome back. We're to the best part of the year where WNBA playoffs, we got MLB playoffs coming up. I'm so sorry to all the D-backs fans in the chat. So sorry for the unfortunate mishaps. I was pulling for the Mets as hard as you guys were. Okay. I really was. I tried my best, but unfortunately, we can't always have what we want here in the Valley. So I guess for now, go Padres. But big shouts to Shane Diefenbach for helping us behind the scenes today. It was a crazy day in PH Next Land with Suns Media Day. Shout out to the Suns. I'm wearing my Sun shirt today, so got to get the reps in. But nonetheless, let's talk about some playoffs. We'll start with the finals rematch with the Liberty and the Aces. I'm not going to lie, it didn't exactly go how I anticipated it.
Unfortunately, it did for me. I just felt like New York is this such a good basketball team. And I think the thing that's been underrated all season, which is something we spoke to in their matchups with the Mercury, that obviously taking on even grander toll on the playoff stage, is the size that the New York Liberty have in comparison to what they had last season. Leonie Fibich, Benaja Laney Hamilton, Kayla Thornton, Nyara Sabali, all of these names that fill gaps for them on the wing and do so effectively and efficiently allows for Sabrina to be her best self offensively, but also allows for the growth that she's seen and she's showcased defensively to have the impact that it needs to for them to win games and win games on this stage and win games against this particular team. So it's been fun to see them have more of a physical edge this season than they did last season, and to see it kind of fluster and really break the rhythm of the Las Vegas Aces in their typically league standard ball movement. Asia was flustered. She saw bodies every time she touched the basketball. Chelsea was able to boogie the space at times, but they got up solid contests. Obviously, Plum Dog did what she did and led the team in scoring. But they just did a really good job, and they really had a solid game plan in game one. And this is where it gets fun because now you got the reigning champs almost against the ropes in the second round. Now it's about, can New York hold serve and win 2 games at home before they go over to Vegas, which is where things would really, really get interesting. What were your thoughts from that first game?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, not that the Aces looked lost, but definitely flustered is a great word for it. The Liberty came out and executed their game plan exactly to a T. And like we've talked about with the Mercury, like you can't allow the lead to get that big in the first half and then come out and not, in the second half and not come out guns a-blazing as far as defense. When you allow them to put up 24 points again in the third quarter, you just can't win that basketball game. It makes for a really difficult game to win on the road. That being said, it was still really, really fun game, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. I don't dare to bet against the Aces, though, still in this entire series, and that's my opinion. That being said, I think it's still kind of anyone's game, but how can anyone bet against Asia and the Aces?
Yeah, Exactly, and that's why I can't fully say that this series is really going in favor of New York. Though I do think they are the better team in terms of what we've seen for the start to finish through the regular season and through the first round. Obviously, Vegas also swept Seattle, not unlike New York did Atlanta. But the way the sustained level of play that New York has established this season, it's made for this matchup to be something that would be a little bit more close to 52 to 48%, if I was saying, slightly in favor of New York. But at the end of the day, like you said, never to bet and count against Vegas. It's even more specifically than Vegas, Asia Wilson. I think she has a loud response in game two. Game plans typically don't last more than a quarter in terms of having an effectiveness on Asia. Theirs lasted pretty much the entire game, seeing her score inefficiently, which is not her standard. I'm looking forward to a loud game two and Kelsey Plum barking back and forth with Spike Lee a little bit more as well in that.
That was so. It's been such a fun playoff as far as just people being involved, celebs and stuff. But that was really, really a good time to see. That being said, I've been excited to talk about this Minnesota Connecticut game just because.
Wait. Not too quick. Prediction for game two. Who you got and why?
Oh, I'm taking
Don't
the
think
Aces
I'll
in
lay you
game
off the
two.
hook.
No.
Okay.
I'm taking the Aces in game
Okay.
two because personally, I, first of all, and this is actually why I wanted to talk about Minnesota first, is because I think that there is a certain banter and chippiness going on against the MVP and the D-Point, and I think that that is going to be a huge driving force of the Aces. Also, the Minnesota Lynx. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about that whole situation here in a second, but I think when you have as much motivation to prove that you're the best in every single category as Asia does because of all these people throwing dirt on her name, I think that they will come out guns blazing. And similar to the sense of the way the Sparks fought for De'Erica versus the Aces, we will see the rest of the Aces pick up the ball against the Liberty.
I definitely see where you're coming from with that. I'm actually going against the grain. I'm gonna say Vegas New York wins both games at home to start this series. And we see the Vegas Aces put in a hole to where they gotta really step up against some adversity. I still think this series goes the distance, but I do think it's gonna come with a lot of adversity and storylines as it heads over to Vegas for games 3 and game 4. So I do think New York wins and they hold serve at home. I do think that the Aces ultimately return the favor, hold serve in front of their home crowd, and then game 5 of this series is going to be one of the 10 most impactful, most watched, most galvanizing games in WNBA history. I think that's what's in store. Hoping it plays out that way because I think this series, especially if it's not taking place in the finals round, deserves all of that attention and then some. And honestly, what better city for it to take place in than New York with all the history on the basketball side that resides there?
And, I wanted to say this. Matthew's Aces versus everyone comment had me thinking about something I said earlier in the season where I actually said that I didn't feel like it was the Aces versus everybody anymore. But personally, I feel like in the latter half of the season and now moving into the playoffs, we're back to that Aces versus everybody mentality.
I think their first chip that season, it was Aces versus everybody. I think last season it was everybody versus Vegas because nobody could really beat them, including New
Yeah.
York. And now this season, it's just been Vegas versus themselves, quite honestly. I think we've
Yeah.
seen a trilogy. It's them versus everyone else, everyone versus them, and now it's them versus themselves. And that's exactly why I feel like their championship medal is really about to be tested this series. And I still think it goes the distance, like I said, but I do think that New York wins both games at home, and then Vegas goes and returns that favor.
Before I move into talking about Connecticut and Minnesota, I want to give a huge shout to the comment section. Be sure to smash that like button while you guys are in here. But Chloe, I want you to know that your name has been brought over to the Wildcat show. We're obsessed. We love you. And so we just wanted you to know you might not watch, but we do chat about you over there. And we hope that you're doing okay since the Mercury loss. We just hope that you've recovered just fine. We really do hope that. That being said, though, I have been so amped to talk about this Connecticut Minnesota game because, first of all, I got one thing to say to start us off, okay? And Nafisa, and she drops an average of 40 points on the Phoenix Mercury, and then the Connecticut Sun come out and just lock her up, bro. And I don't mean to make it sound like she did nothing, but when you go from averaging 40 points in the first playoff series to now what I want to say she scored 19 points. Yes, ma'am. And it just hurt so bad to watch. I just wanted to start there because it, as a Mercury fan, it really hurt.
It's tough, and I understand it. But it's also hard to guard feet when you don't have the players that you typically would be expecting to have at your disposal to give those multiple bodies. Connecticut is healthy, and when they're healthy, it's tough to score against them. They really did a good job. I just got done speaking to New York being really disciplined with their game plan with Asia. Generally speaking, for everything that Minnesota does, but especially tuned in specifically to Nafisa Kahleah, Connecticut was taking away all of their movement. They made them work in a little bit more isolation than Minnesota is typically accustomed to working in. And honestly, Connecticut is one of only a few teams that could play that style of defense and put Minnesota or in those scenarios and really kind of take them out of their offensive rhythm that's made them one of the better teams and one of the better offenses over the course of the season. Minnesota had 27 made field goals, only 16 assists on those 27 field goals. And we talked about them having one of the best passing seasons as a team in WNBA history. The fact that Connecticut was able to mitigate as much of that, make them work in isolation, make them work late in the clock, that's the template and game plan that Nate Tibbetts and company were looking to get to. Obviously, Nate didn't have the necessary personnel to execute to the extent that he desired. But we're seeing Connecticut execute a very similar game plan to that with a bump up in physicality, which is obviously accustomed to their identity. And we see them throw the first punch in that series. And I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility that Connecticut ends up in the finals again. And if they get this version of Marina Mabrey, they got a chance of winning it all because that's what she was brought in for. Like, yes, they want her to make the wide open shots. Yes, they want her to be a chess piece in terms of how she's spaced around the floor. All of these little things within their offensive process. The other big thing, when they hit a snag because of the lack of shooting that they have and the lack of threats for shooting in the ways that teams guard them, being able to just give the ball to Marina Mabrey and allow for her to work late in the shot clock and be able to not just create space to get up shots, but knock them down on efficiency. She's a tough shot taker, and she's a tough shot maker. She's never been scared of a moment, and she is very much a Nate Tibbetts type of let that thing fly offensive player. And that's a whole lot of what she did, and she was embracing the crowd and all of the boos and everything with the banter back and forth that came with it. Even talking to Kahleah McBride at multiple moments, which was fun to watch as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really fun game, and like you said, I was
Excuse me. Looks like Erica was having some technical difficulties, but yeah, just to speak to a little bit more on the Minnesota and Connecticut series, I think maybe the biggest X factor for Minnesota in that series is going to be Kahleah McBride. They have to find a way to get Minnesota out, or to get Connecticut, excuse me, out of the aggressive switching scheme that they were putting forth in that game. And I think a large part of that is going to come down to Kahleah McBride and her tough shot making abilities. But the other big thing within all of that I'm going to be looking forward to as well within that series, Courtney Williams. We talked about in our series preview for Minnesota up against the Phoenix Mercury in the first round, how you can do a lot of really good stuff defensively against Minnesota. But for one, they move the ball extremely well. For two, they have great player movement paired in sync with their ball movement, but also independent of the ball movement. And then number three, which was maybe one of the biggest reasons I was excited to see Courtney Williams added to their team context, was largely because Courtney, like you could take away an initial Nafisa Kahleah post up, send a double team, defend it well individually, whatever. Get an initial stop there in the first couple seconds of the shot clock. Then you can also take away a potential dribble handoff or Kayla McBride running off of screens. But you get to the last 10 seconds of the shot clock, in addition to the spacing that they can compile, you also got Courtney Williams working in pick and roll with Nafisa Kahleah or Alana Smith, and multiple players that can space the floor effectively around that in 5-out type of spacing. And Courtney Williams having all of the mid-range to work with a live dribble, and her ability to knock down shots on consistency from the mid-range, it's like the ultimate trump card, especially when you get to the playoff stage where mid-range baskets take on a different type of meaning. That's something I'm keeping in my mind and in my back pocket for these games being close like they were last night. And I think that play in the clutch, especially on the offensive end, and being able to have something that you can solve in terms of counterpunching the defense, I think that's something that Connecticut can compile. And seeing Courtney Williams against her former or one of her former teams, I think at some point there's going to be some type of revenge X factor that comes in that, and her just being able to step up to the moment, rise to the occasion, and really show that she's still one of the better players in the WNBA. It's going to be fun to watch that going forward. I'm very curious to see how that series is going to end up. Just generally speaking, I did pick Minnesota to win that series in 4. However, I could definitely see avenues and outlets to where Connecticut can repeat, at least defensively, a lot of what we saw in game 1. And it might not necessarily be accompanied by multiple big shots taken and being made by Marina Mabrey to the extent that we saw in game 1. But someone that's very fond of Phoenix and that the X Factor is very fond of as well, also is still playing with the Connecticut Sun. Known for taking and making all types of big-time shots, whether it's the finals, the first round of the playoffs, the regular season. It doesn't matter. DeWanna Bonner's never seen a shot that she can't make. And the fact that they have somebody else, including Ty Harris, that can create and pick and roll and allow for her to not do so much on the ball, but still be ready and locked and loaded to let it fly off the ball. That's something else that when these games get to clutch time moments, I think both of these teams having players that can operate in this way, it's going to be fun to kind of watch and see them kind of trade blows, play chess on the fly. And this is a series that has seen the back-to-back coaches of the year. Obviously, Stephanie White taking the reign on Coach of the Year last season, and then naturally being announced on Sunday was Cheryl Reeve being Coach of the Year for this season. 2 of the 5 best coaches in the W. For my money, it would be 2 of the 4 best coaches, depending on how you want to rank them. There's a lot of chess being played. I think it doesn't get that much better than what these 2 teams have on the sidelines. And I think when you get into a series where you're able to key in on specific players, a specific team, their tendencies, their shot profile, all of that stuff, I think this is where the coaching and the brain trust really shows and comes to the light. And I think for that in particular is why this series is so intriguing for me. You can say the same thing about Sandy Brondello and Becky Hammond on the other end. But for this particular series, with the pieces that both of these 2 teams have in play, I think it's very much a styles make fights type of thing. Obviously, Connecticut being the bruiser, overly physical at times identity for them. And then the finesse and 5-out spacing and switching and everything that Minnesota has baked into their identity for this season. So it's going to be fun to watch how that one plays out. I'm going to go ahead and say I still got Minnesota winning this series in 4. Obviously, that just got a lot tougher with them losing the first game. And like I mentioned, I can definitely see many outlets to where Connecticut could potentially win this series as well, especially with a repeatable template that they saw in game 1. Erica, I was just kind of diving into that series. Talked about matchups and some of the things that I like in it, and ultimately who I picked to win that series, which you heard. So who you got in that series, why you got them in the series, and yeah, let's talk about it.
I want to say 2 things. First of all, I have a team I want to win, and I have a team I think will win. And I'm going to be honest on both, and that I would like to see the Minnesota Lynx win because they just beat the Phoenix Mercury. So I would like to see them go as far as possible, because that I want the Mercury to be beat by the best team. You see what I'm saying? The logic here. But that being said, Chloe in the comments with a great point, miss no shoulders, Alyssa Thomas is the best at bully ball. And personally, obviously, you've talked a lot about Marina, but the pieces that they've had in Connecticut for a long time, they've been working together for a while, and they just have this chemistry that the Minnesota Lynx, while they have chemistry and it's there, I just think that the Connecticut has more trust in each other and is willing to do whatever it takes for each other to win the game because they want it more. And so, in my opinion, I do think Connecticut takes the series. But again, I would love to see Minnesota in 4. That's my dream.
Yeah, I like I said, I could definitely see Connecticut. I think Connecticut has more outlets. They have more ways in which they can win this series than Minnesota does, just because of how they can dominate in those kind of ancillary dynamics of the game, the extra efforts, the physicality part, weighing on an opponent over a series, and then obviously, most importantly, the rebounding part of things. I think that can become tough for Minnesota to overcome, especially with the way that their roster is set up. But I think the big number and the big kind of stat and category to watch in this series is going to be the three-point shooting. Minnesota only knocked down 5 threes, and we saw what they did against the Phoenix Mercury in the first round. They didn't shoot that many wide open shots. Like, there were a handful of good contests in that series against the Mercury. They just have a bunch of very good elite level three-point shooters, Bridget Carlton and Kahleah McBride of note before anybody else. But them knocking down only 5 threes, I feel like if they get anywhere close to their average on the season, I think that really switches and really shifts this series. And we see everything that we talked about, and Connecticut won that game by 3 points. So, the return of the three ball, obviously the main part of the game plan outside of Nafisa Collier for Connecticut is to take away the three-point line. It's going to be some tug and pull back and forth there. But if Marina doesn't get hot the way that she did in the first game and Minnesota gets back to their average, I think we can see things really start to even out. And I picked Minnesota because I don't trust that Connecticut can score enough. I think they can score in timely manners, like I spoke to while Erica was away. But I just don't know that they can do it on consistency. I don't know if that offensive template that they showed in game 1 is something that they can repeat on for 3 more times to win this series, or 2 more times to win this series. So stay tuned on that, but that's kind of what I'm looking at going forward in this series, that three-point line for Minnesota in particular.
Rob in the comments, I wouldn't say now or never for the Sun Core, but more so for me, it feels like if not now, when type, like, and I'm going to get in, we're going to get into expansion in just a second, but I mean, you're going to see a lot of teams that just don't look the same over the next 3 years. And so 4 years likely. So, I don't think it's never, but if not now, when for sure is kind of how I feel looking at the Connecticut Sun roster.
I mean, continuity has to pay off at some point.
Right.
If not, then you have to switch things up. I think naturally we talk about them switching things up. Kurt Miller taking himself out of the picture and choosing to go elsewhere prior to the 2023 season. And Stephanie White naturally coming into place. That gives them a new voice. That gives them someone with different philosophy, beliefs, and things like that. That's one step in it. But if this team can't get it done, let's say this season, who's to say what the future has to show? Because things are going to get tougher in the W. More teams are going to be playing more modern styles of basketball than Connecticut is. And if the math is consistently not in their favor, especially when you get to the playoff stage, things are going to grow stale in ways that they did with Kurt Miller. And we're talking about a team that was consistently in the second round, if not making it to the WNBA finals a couple of times within that time with Kurt Miller, and just could never knock that final hurdle down in terms of kicking the door down and winning the chip. So it's not like this team is underachieving in any capacity. It's just a matter of what is the feeling in terms of capacity for this group. They've had their core 4 together for a handful of seasons now, and it hasn't paid off in terms of winning it all. So I think that hourglass is kind of not taking in their favor at this point. And I think largely this season, how they finish is going to determine kind of what's going to happen going forward.
Amanda, calling the Phoenix Mercury geriatric is just triggering, okay? I would say middle-aged is much more fair than geriatric, okay? But all that said, I am really excited to talk about the expansion. And we got the news this morning. We got the email letting us know that we're going to be seeing the expansion draft before the end of the year on December 6th, actually, to be exact. And so, Shane, let's just start with the slay of the day here because Steven and I, a few weeks ago, talked about how they better not fumble the bag here. They better give us this expansion draft timely because personally this is too big of a break in between the end of the season and the start of the season. It's like what, 8 or 9 months. So giving us this expansion draft on December 6th, listen, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh my god, Kathy, you're my favorite person west of the Mississippi River. But big shouts to Kathy on this one because thinking back to All-Star, Steven and I talked about it on the show. She told us there was a possibility we didn't even get the expansion draft rules until December. So being that we're getting the expansion draft in December is to me a massive W for the W. I think it's going to keep eyes on the sport and just keep people excited and engaged in the league.
Yeah, I think you said that well. And just kind of looking at the timing with the draft taking place December 9th on ESPN, I think that strategically, timing wise, that's perfect because a few weeks after that, free agency starts. And obviously, that you get to that point, the season will have been done for about 2.5, 3 months or so prior to then. So you kind of hit this little dead space where there's not much news going on. It's also going to be happening, I think, before Unrivaled is supposed to be taking place as well. Like naturally, the W is not thinking about when Unrivaled is happening, but women's basketball on this side of the country or this side of the globe, excuse me, won't really be cracking too much outside of the collegiate level. So I think timing wise, I think it makes sense in terms of the calendar that the W is operating on. Adds a little bit more intrigue to the offseason, which I think is one that's going to have more rumors in terms of players and trades going here and there and everywhere else in between than any offseason in W history. This just adds a little bit more intrigue and spice to that.
For sure. And Rob, to answer your question, I'm not sure if Kathy is actually west of the Mississippi River. Okay, it's theoretical. Okay, but nonetheless, I'm very satisfied with this decision by the league. That being said, I do have one thing that is not so slay of the day that I would like to point out.
I got a question for you after that too, so let's do it.
Why don't you ask a question first?
All right. They specified, as they did with the most recent expansion draft, teams will be allowed to keep 6 players on a roster that are under team control in some capacity. So I'm curious for you. We kind of talked about it a little bit before, but I don't think that was on there. Who would be your 6 players for the Mercury that you're keeping on roster?
I personally am going to keep Natasha Cloud, Kahleah Copper, Sophie Cunningham, Rebecca Allen, Celeste Taylor, which I know some of you in the chat are probably, because you've heard me earlier in the season, I was not all that sure, but I've come around. And is that 4 or 5? Did I say
5?
Last is BG.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, very interesting. I was torn. So we got 5 of the 6. Obviously, Sophie, Kai, Tosh, BG, and Beck Allen. So obviously those 5. That 6th spot is where it gets very interesting. I do feel like, first of all, shout out to Natasha Mack. She had one hell of a season. Very underrated. The Mercury don't get to where they were in terms of the standings without her playing the way that she did early in the season before Brittany Griner came back. And she was playing at almost the all WNBA defensive team level with the way that she was blocking shots, the way that she was anchoring that defense, getting in the switching and hedging and communicating and doing all of the things that you would expect from Brittany Griner. That being said, where I was kind of torn was between Celeste and Mac Truck. And I was torn.
I love that we got Steven saying Mac Truck. Hold on, pause. That's a W in the chat, y'all. W in the chat. Go nuts.
And I was torn. I was torn because I feel like you can replicate maybe on a potentially cheaper salary. Because I do think that Natasha Mack has earned herself a couple extra pennies going into next season. I feel like you can find someone that can replicate in maybe a similar manner, but maybe bring you a little bit more value on the offensive end while giving something similar to that realm of activity defensively to back up Brittany Griner. I think that's something that's replicable in some capacity, especially based off of who's going to be available in free agency this upcoming offseason. Where I wasn't sure, though, is that you could find somebody that can defend in the ways that Celeste Taylor can, but also to be able to have that type of synergy that she has with Kahleah Copper and Natasha Cloud. And then the third big thing in all of that, and we talked about this earlier in the season, with the Mercury being such a veteran-heavy team, you got to balance that out with some youthfulness, particularly on the perimeter, so that you can get out and run a little bit more. You can play with a little bit more activity defensively. All of these things that I'm speaking about, Celeste Taylor checks those boxes off and then some. You talk about the shooting, cool. This team's not signing any more players, obviously contingent upon what Diana Taurasi decides to do going into next season. But this team is not looking at its present state for somebody else that can put the ball in the basket on consistency. They're looking for people that can excel at doing things on the margins, play complementary basketball to everything that their core four or their big four does, and generally just be a really, really solid and dependable teammate. Celeste Taylor checks off all of those boxes. She's a piece that kind of serves as a draft pick for a team that didn't really have one this past season. And I think that she's someone that also really integrated herself well into the Mercury context, especially after the Olympic All-Star break.
Well, big shouts to David and Dylan for this because apparently we don't need to protect BG, so we can keep both.
Both as in Celeste and
Mac Truck.
BG? Oh, Celeste and Mac Truck? Okay. But it's still the number is 6, though.
But he said that we don't have to protect her because she has been cored multiple times within the last 2 years. And I do believe I read, but I'm not the so I think that they are correct.
Yeah, I believe it was Ari. Don't quote me on this. I believe it was Ari Chambers though that kind of helped to bring some concision to that little gray area that existed because it's such fresh news. I think she said she messaged Kathy or she messaged somebody in the decision-making process about it, and she was able to kind of clarify that for us. So I don't quote me on that, but I believe Ari did shore that particular gray area up pertaining to who's available and who's not.
Well, good news, she did clear one other gray area up, and we got to talk about it because this is actually the not so slay of the day part that I was going to bring attention to. And I understand that it has been done in the same way in the past, but I do not agree. And this is a show I do talk and I do give my opinion. And so I'm going to talk about it for a second. And I don't believe that they should not share who is protected. I think it does the players above all else a massive disservice. Period. So and obviously I don't know that this is going to be the case, but okay, so you're taking number 1 in the expansion draft. Whoopee, except we don't know who you were picked against. So what does it mean? And I just think that it's a very big miss by the league personally. And I know it's been done that same way in the past, but I think again, like you're just allowing it to be marketed incorrectly doing it this way.
I want to shout out one of my dear friends in this WNBA media community, Christian, formerly known as 808s and Snack Breaks, now known as Christian WNBA, is his Twitter handle now. He tweeted not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 hours ago, that the W so consistently makes it hard for individuals to cover the league. And that was a sentiment that resonated fairly well with me. Multiple reasons. In particular, sticking to the timeliness of the moment, the expansion draft news, and not having those names accessible to the public. How is it that a media member is supposed to go about doing their job if the information is not made accessible to at least the people that are covering the league to inform and bridge that gap between the league itself and the people, the consumer? You're putting a pin in the process of something that was so well put together, like we just got done talking about. The one step forward, two step back type of process that they operate with. You have to get out of your own way. And this is something so easily
Right.
avoidable. I understand there are logistics and there are things that are above my pay grade to speak to or even understand because I'm not paid by the W. I understand that part of things, but I do understand the chain of command. The league does things, the media understands it, receives it, studies it, and then plays it over to the fans. You can't take away the middleman in that just by simply not having that information available. That's going to make this a whole lot harder of a process than it has to be. And it's just a microcosm of the little things that consistently serve as hurdles for the WNBA as they continue evolving.
Yeah, I wanted to give Kathy her flowers, but I also had to bring us back. You know what I mean?
Extended it and then had to pull it back. Like, no, almost there, but we're not quite there yet. Still got a little work to do.
You give them an inch and they take the whole Louisiana Purchase, Steven. You know what I mean?
Hey, I'm chilling on that one. I'm not responding.
Okay. Well, with that though, we got to pay the bills. So let's just take a quick little break here so I can give a big shout to our good friend over at Empire Flooring. Empire today, you get quick, at-home, convenient shopping right at home. You don't have to leave your house, you guys. You can go right out in your living room right now, take a picture, upload it to their super sick new floor visualizer at empiretoday.com/phnx. You can upload that, see what your new floors are going to look like, pick out a few different ones, test them out, see what you like. And then once you've decided, you can use code PHNX for $350 off of those new floors. Empire Today keeps shopping for floors simple with curated product selection. Their philosophy is to just help you find what you need and not overwhelm you with 1,000 choices. So keep things simple by going to empiretoday.com/phnx. And you guys are going to be super excited because our good friends over at Circle K are also giving us shouts today with the new Inner Circle program, free to download on your phone, into your email and phone number, and you automatically are enrolled for these points and rewards. You guys can get your 25 cents off of your 25 cents off a gallon for the first 5 fill-ups when you join their Inner Circle program. My goodness. And then 3 cents per day every day after that, but plenty of other member exclusive deals and discounts. Listen, I don't know if you guys have had Polar Pop today, but I certainly have. And if you haven't, head over there, use your Inner Circle rewards, get yourself a Polar Pop and fill up on gas and come back and finish the show right when we're done. Chloe, I don't have any more to read, so I'm really sorry, but I'm glad that I could deliver on those for you today. That being said, though, we are going to talk a little bit about Mercury today. We with not too much going on planet Mercury, I'm still excited to be here with Steven and talk about Kahleah. And Steven has a little bit of an interesting relationship with Kahleah because he's gotten to cover her for the last multiple years. And now Steven's frozen, so I'm concerned that I've lost him. Nope, he's still here. So I'm excited today because Steven is going to talk to us about the evolution of Kahleah over the last couple of years because, like I was saying, he's just had sort of an interesting perspective since he got to watch her go from Chicago now to her new, very happy home here in the Valley.
Yes. So something we're going to be doing on these next handful of episodes is kind of looking at players' seasons in review. And who better to start with than Kahleah Copper, the team's best player this season. Just a special talent, a very special talent. And I think there's no better place to start with Kahleah than, first of all, her being able to take on the attention that she was receiving from opponents this season and flip it into an advantage, not just for herself, but also for others. The first thing I'm going to speak to is the three-point shooting. Now, yes, her three-point shooting did take a dip later on in the season, but for that early portion of the season, Kahleah was shooting 40% from deep on like 5.5 attempts a game. That's in addition to the buckets in the paint and the buckets at the rim in particular and the midi pull-ups. She was like, I think that if you extrapolate the Olympic All-Star break and obviously her playing and spending time over in Paris and traveling and all of that fun stuff that happened there. If you extrapolate that and you get a regular all-star break and she just hits the ground running going into that second stretch of the regular season, I think we see a lot of the numbers that we saw through that first 4 to 6 weeks really stabilize. And I think maybe that's one, if not the biggest thing, takeaway wise for Kahleah this season. Just the impact she had as a 3-level scorer. Still arguably the most dominant non-front court player in terms of scoring in the paint. Still finished in the top percentiles in terms of her efficiency and effectiveness in the paint. But that ability to not just have that, but also be able to counterpunch. Teams are playing me soft. So now I'm going to come off a pick and roll, one dribble, pull up for 3, splash. You can't go under with me anymore. If you keep going under, I'm going to knock down 5 threes against you. Ask Las Vegas how that went. Ask New York how that went. Ask Minnesota how that went. And then now you start to go over screens. Now she's able to get downhill, and she's putting pressure on the paint, putting pressure on the rim. Teams got to make choices. And that leads me to the next step in growth for Kahleah. So obviously, elite level bucket getter. She finished 3rd in points per game on average and 3rd in total points scored on the season. For my money, if she doesn't miss that handful of games that she did with the injury late in the season, she finishes outright 2nd in terms of points per game and on average as a scorer. I think that's put a bow and ribbon on that. That was over with. But in terms of the attention that she's garnering on consistency and how she's being game planned for now as a top piece, I think that as she spoke to, which I'll be writing about tomorrow on Go PHNX, the passing. She showed flashes where she's anticipating where help is coming from after she's seen it. She's getting off of it quick. She's taking an extra dribble to make sure the defense holds their position and to take the ball away from her, and then kicking it to somebody else in a timely manner for them to either score directly off of or to keep that advantage to somebody else that can eventually score. So those are like some of the biggest things. You got a little bit more to dive into with Kahleah, but I'm curious, Erica, what were your assessments of your first season getting to cover and watch Kahleah on a consistent basis?
Listen, first half of the season, Kahleah Copper, they're going to write movies, books, hanging in the lurve type nonsense, okay? That was just, it was, if you didn't see it, you didn't believe it type nonsense, right? And I think I saw a comment that said, oh, she's going to leave if Philly opens up. Listen, I personally believe that Kahleah loves the pieces around her, and I'm not talking about the players. I'm talking about the front office and the coaching staff and everything else about the Valley that is here to support her. And as I'm sitting here listening to Steven talk, my wheels are turning about how much better she's going to be after she plays in 3-on-3 for an entire season. I think you're just going to see Kahleah take leaps and bounds next season, specifically, like you said, with her passing and her ability to read defenses.
That latter point for me, the passing and ability to read defenses, is something that's really going to put her over the top. I mean, we talked about it this season. You can't name at any given moment, you can't name 9 better players in the WNBA than Kahleah Copper. And quite honestly, if I'm really being serious, you can't name on consistency 7 players that are better than Ka, whether she's at the peak of her powers or if she's at just her typical self, which is obviously over elite. And to that point, that next step in her playmaking abilities, she had 193 assist points created. That means she compiled 193 total points generated from her assists this season. That's her career high. She also got to 79 total assists, which is also her career high. And the big thing within those assists, which is specific to this Phoenix Mercury context, the fact that so many of her assists resulted in 3-point makes. And that number in particular, 35. 35 of her 100 or 35 of her 79, assists this season came from shots that resulted in 3-point makes. There's a ton of value in that, because if you think about the ways that Kahleah gets her assists, more often than not, she's either driving or she's coming off of a pick and roll, and somebody else, if not 2 other somebody else's, are showing attention to her to deter her from getting up a shot. And that's leading to spray out passes to the 3-point line. And I think in process, that's important to note, because when she's getting downhill, the defense just can't be right. And if she's playmaking at the requisite level that she needs to, in addition to the attention that she's garnering from defenses, that's where the Mercury are going to be at their best. Like, yes, Natasha Cloud had a franchise best season in terms of assists. Obviously, if Diana Taurasi comes back, she can make plays as well. But neither one of those two players are the scoring threat that the Kahleah Copper is at this point in her career, nor are either of those two as prolific in terms of getting downhill and the attention that comes with that. You'll never see Kahleah Copper single covered unless it's Brittany Sykes, like a top percentile defender. And there's only like maybe 2 or 3 of those in the W that will be tasked with guarding her in single coverage. She's going to get extra attention from everywhere. The more her process grows in terms of her court vision, her feel for the game, and the ways in which she can go about making the passes that she needs to, that's going to be just another layer that's going to be added to this Phoenix Mercury team. And it's going to make them a contender for years and years and years to come. Kahleah Copper is not at the peak of her powers yet. She's scratching the surface of it, but I don't think she's even close to where she's going to potentially be when it's all said and done in terms of her peak.
Well, one other thing I will say about Kahleah, I had to laugh at exit interviews when someone asked, what are your off-season plans? And she's like, y'all think they built this $100,000 or $100 million facility for me to go somewhere else? Like, it was very hilarious to me. Like, so the off-season work is going to be happening here in the Valley. Period. Both, all of the core is staying in town. They're all going to go visit their family, and maybe go play Unrivaled, but they're all going to be putting in that off-season work here in the Valley.
I think that bodes extremely well to the continuity piece that we speak to other teams having as an advantage. The Mercury did not have that in their favor this season. Talked about the amount of games that their main pieces that they were looking to win with this season. They only had, I think it was 8 games if we counted, 8 or 9 games, or maybe it was 12.
Other teams, they got to practice with their teams. The Phoenix Mercury barely even got to play games with their team.
Correct. And you talked about the point that they had so many injuries at one point. They didn't even have enough to go 5-on-5 at practice.
Period.
With the players that are actually on roster. Obviously, they have practice squad players that they scrimmage against, but you don't get the same type of looks not going up against WNBA level talent. And when you only have 9 players or 8 players that are literally available at multiple moments over the season, none of them made that as an excuse, but that's definitely something that impacts you for the little bit of time that you do actually even have the practice with the way that this season was set up. So those things are important to note. Last big thing on Kahleah Copper before we kind of transition away from her as a topic. She's spoken a few times to her not getting the attention that she deserves to have and has earned when it comes to looking at her defense. And she's always been an above average defender. She doesn't get the credit that she deserves because her offense is so loud. But I do think that if you're thinking about what's next for Kahleah Copper, obviously another championship is something that she relishes more than anything else, and however it comes. But I think that the however it comes is going to come with her taking even another step on defense and becoming that well-rounded player to where she can score for herself, she can facilitate to others, she can score in multiple manners. She can get after it on defense, guarding the best players at multiple times, as she did when she was with the Chicago Sky in the championship season and for the 2 seasons after that before she came to Phoenix. I think she's going to be hell-bent on really setting a standard and really letting people know, don't forget about me on defense. And I think that's something that's going to also be a piece that really helps the Mercury turn more corners going into next season as well.
Well, you know what else is going to help them turn more corners?
Natasha Cloud.
I was going to say a little barking. You know what I mean? A little bark.
Of course. Absolutely.
And we got to give big shouts. We've been talking about all defense, Tosh Cloud, on the show since quite literally show number 1. You can go back, listen to it yourself, because we both barked on behalf of Tosh and getting her on this all defense team. Shane, if you could please show our fine listeners the graphic for Tosh Cloud's all defensive team selection. She is the first Mercury guard to ever be selected for the WNBA all defensive team, which I'm going to be honest is pretty cool considering, some of the people that have come, from the Mercury before her. And this is only her first year with the squad. So huge shouts to Tosh Cloud. We've talked about her guarding positions 1 through 5 all season on this show. Sometimes reluctantly, we haven't really wanted to talk about her guarding the 5 that much, but she certainly has done it, and she's done it at a great capacity and very well. And just huge shouts to Tosh.
Yep. We talked about her being able to guard 1 through 5. It doesn't matter who, doesn't matter where. She's got the job done, and she's done it on consistency for this team. We talked about her being the tone setter. Nate calls her their vibe in terms of everybody falling in alignment with how she's operating, especially defensively. She is their identity piece on that end of the floor, especially. And I think she wears that crown extremely well. This all defensive team selection, yet another one in her illustrious career, especially defensively, comes as no surprise. The Mercury were 5 points better per 100 possessions when she was on the floor defensively than when she rested. And I think it could be seen and felt when she wasn't on the court that they were missing her presence, whether that be her physically guarding somebody on ball, her physically denying a post off the ball, the ability to switch, or just generally speaking, literally on the speaking part, her communication.
Right.
Brittany Griner is a high-level communicator. A lot of times she conceded to Natasha Cloud if you look at the film because Natasha is just so preemptive with everything. And it's not like they're competing to see who's the defensive anchor. When you have multiple players doing that, guess what? That becomes contagious. Now Celeste Taylor's barking in terms of communicating defensively, and Kahleah Copper is doing the same. And obviously you got Nate saying everything under the sun from the sideline in addition to all of that. These things are just so important to trying to establish a system and an identity defensively. And this defensive player of the year, I wish he got that. This all defensive team selection was well earned, much deserved, and she's gonna get another one next season for sure. You can stamp that.
I would gander to say that we have multiple Phoenix Mercury on the all defensive team next year.
I think one way or another, and we'll get into that over the offseason, but one way or another, I think this Mercury team ends up with 2, if not 3 next season.
I think that
3, Nate and company are going to be all in on figuring out how to get their defensive system established early, having a full offseason to kind of implement things, run over film with players, establish the system and everything that comes with that. They're going to really be looking to key in defensively to allow for their offense to have the impact that they desire for it to. It's going to look a lot different in 2025.
Before you go, I do got one last thing because someone commented on our little show right now about Nate getting some shots thrown at him on Twitter, especially since Teaspoon's firing. And, Stephen and I had our own little conniption via text message about Teaspoon's firing. We're not going to get into it on this show. You can go over to CHGO Sky if you want to hear them yap about that. But that being said, I don't know who's leading this Fire Nate Tibbetts movement, but you need to stop it because it's ridiculous. And I've already said it on the show actually 2 weeks in a row, but it really is ridiculous. Are we talking about the Phoenix Mercury that were the worst team in the league last year? Oh, and they made the playoffs this year when they only played 11 games with their full roster. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We're talking about firing that coach, right?
That's my thing. You talk about chemistry for players. That takes a season, especially when you have so much newness that the Mercury had on the court. You flip that to a coach's perspective, the same way that players need time to mesh with cohesion and chemistry is the same way that a coach and staff, not just the particular head coach, but the coach and staff in relationship with the players is going to take that same type of time, if not even a little bit more, just because of the attention to detail that has to come with that. It's the reason why you don't see championship teams built overnight. It's the reason why, especially on the NBA side of things, they say when teams build a big 3, it's going to be that season after the initial one where they start to look like that juggernaut that whoever it is that's pulling the strings for that franchise established them to be for that to surface in terms of what they look like. Naturally, with the Phoenix Mercury, they're in a very similar situation with that. Now, they're still going to be a little bit behind that curve just because they only played 11 or 12 games with that big unit that they look to put together actually intact during the regular season. So it's going to take them time to get back to a certain level and then start to turn those corners. But I do think it will be next season that the Phoenix Mercury really start to look like that team that we expected them to be. It's going to be because of the time allotted for the chemistry to be built. But the other big thing is going to be Nate Tibbetts and company being able to have a more of a detailed manner in which they go about filling out on the margins. I think that's going to be the key for them, and I think they're going to really do a good job, especially with the way that Matt Ishbia was speaking at Media Day for the Phoenix Suns, making sure that he's sprinkled in some Mercury talk, that he's excited for everything to come in the offseason for that team as well. So be on the lookout for that. We got a lot of fun to get into on the offseason in terms of players, seeing what's going on with Diana Taurasi, and where the Mercury are headed into the 2025 season.
Matt Ishbia is so cool. Like, and I don't mean to sound so unserious about it, but he is such a cool owner. Like, for it to be Phoenix Suns Media Day, you got Kevin Durant and Devin Booker sitting, and you're going to be talking about the Mercury. I just think there's probably not a whole lot of other NBA owners doing that same thing, I would think.
Well, when you're in ownership, I think he's made it abundantly obvious that he's not just in ownership of one team. He's in ownership of multiple teams, and he takes time every time he's speaking publicly to make sure people remember that. He might talk about something specific to the Suns because he was brought in to speak about the Suns, but he's going to make sure that you also remember that he owns the Phoenix Mercury and that they've added Kahleah Copper and Nate Tibbetts and Natasha Cloud, and that they look to win the championship on that side of basketball no differently than they look to invest in on the men's side of things. Quite literally, with them getting the All-Star game and being able to get that facility built a whole year and some change in advance from when it was supposed to be ready. That you can talk about some of the ways in which he goes about spending his money. I think that owners should be all in on winning if it is that they're coming, if that's what they're coming into ownership to do. I think his energy and his attention to detail and his actions have matched that. And I think there's no better example than him finding a way to get Kahleah Copper as we start to get close to training camp, but also figuring out how to expedite that the practice facility situation as well. You don't make those moves unless you're serious. You move with a different type of urgency, and he's had that and then some for the Mercury equally, if not even more than he has with the Phoenix Suns. So big salute to him for that. If you're going to be in ownership of multiple franchises, I don't think you should be operating any other way than he has so far.
Basically, we're just telling you that the dog mentality in the Valley spreads far beyond just the players.
Listen, absolutely. Like we said, it sprinkles into the front office, the head coaching staff, the players, everywhere in between. Obviously, X Factor got a whole lot of dogs. Shout out to the dogs in the chat tapping in with us again. And it's a vibe. It's a vibe.
Well, before we go, I got to tell you guys to go become a diehard. You can join us in the diehard Discord chat. You get 20% off of all events and merch, ad-free website experience, and also a physical diehard card. And you know what? I'm actually going to have to talk to them because I don't have a physical diehard card. And last I checked, I'm a diehard. So I'm going to have to get back to them on that and then show that off for all of you guys because what the heck? I would like that card. And you get a free hat or t-shirt of your choice upon signing up. So go to gophnx.com, become a diehard. But Stephen, if they're looking for you in the meantime, we're hopefully going to be back next week with some more yapping about the playoffs, maybe some more expansion news. Who really knows in this day and age with the W right now? But until then, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter always at StayTrueS.3. Definitely talking WNBA playoffs. Obviously, Phoenix Suns galore news coming up over the next handful of weeks as they transition into preseason play from training camp. So be on the lookout for a whole lot of Sun stuff coming soon. We'll definitely have some player reviews coming up between this episode and our next one, and potentially a couple after next Monday's episode as well. Starting with Kahleah Copper tomorrow. So let the conversations we had today be a little bit of a precursor and looking out for that article to come at some point tomorrow. Outside of that, don't forget to tap in with the Basketball Reference newsletter that they have for women's basketball, not just for the W, but also for women's college basketball, which is also in the media day realm of time in terms of their schedule too. So make yourself a more informed fan. Tap in with their newsletter. Easy Google search basketball reference women's basketball newsletter. Provide them with the email you want to send to, and they'll provide you with information following games every morning. So tap in over there. Make yourself more informed, and let's continue to clean up the discourse because we're still seeing crazy things said. And there's just too much great basketball going on for that to be taking place. Look at the 2 games that we saw over the weekend. And why are the conversations that are being had? If it's basketball that we're here for, let's appreciate what's going on the court. And if you want to dive into those other things, let it come well after you speak into the greatness that's taking place on the court. Don't have to pin the fees of Kahleah against A'ja Wilson. Just don't have to.
Period. What my guy said. Period. That being said, though, you can head over to Twitter. Follow us both at PHNX_Mercury, where I get to, you guys can still see the memes, okay? So check in with us over there, and you can follow me over at Erica Lee Day. But until then, we will see you guys next week.
We all silly like the mayor.